Welcome to the virtual nightmare family. A six-person family was found dead on their property in April 1922, having been bludgeoned. The family had been dead for days, according to the evidence, yet the day before, according to witnesses, someone had been living there. This horrifyingly meant that the murderer had to stay on the farm for nearly a week while the family's bodies rotted in the barn. Although the killer's identity remains a mystery to this day, were there warning indications 6 months before the killings? Is it feasible that the farm was really as spooky as so many people claimed? Alternatively, might a member of the family have committed the murder? A little farmstead called Hinterkaifeck, which was surrounded by forests, was located between two Bavarian towns around 40 miles north of Munich. The Gruber family, which included the couple Andreas and Kazilia, ages 63 and 72, their widowed daughter Victoria, age 35, and their two grandkids Kazilia, age 7, and Joseph, age 2, together with a maid, all resided on the property. Due to their scandalous notoriety, the family was not well liked in the nearby communities. It was well known that Victoria and Andreas had been charged and found guilty of engaging in an incestuous relationship, which many believe was the cause of Joseph's birth. The household maid abruptly left the family in September 1921. She allegedly said the farm was haunted and that she could no longer lie there fearlessly. According to reports, she reported to the police that she would occasionally hear footsteps and other odd noises coming from the vacant attic in the middle of the night. Every night at midnight, the door would open on its own. Whatever it was enough to cause her to give up because she was afraid of the paranormal. Andreas allegedly told a couple of his neighbors that he didn't believe her after she left, but a few months later, he heard the same noises. After commencing his own search, Andreas discovered nothing unusual and declined assistance from his neighbors in carrying on or beginning a new search. A snowstorm pounded the Hinterkaifeck farmstead around the end of March 1922. Andreas made a shocking discovery when a thin coating of snow coated the landscape. A series of footsteps that led to the farm's machinery room were discovered to be coming out of the woods. Even though the lock on the door to the machine room had failed a few weeks before, Andreas never bothered to repair it. It now seemed as though someone was utilizing as a refuge. Andreas looked everywhere, including the house, the farm, and the machine room, but nothing was there. Even if it was determined that no one was present, the knowledge that there were no footsteps leading back to the woods gave way to a terrifying sensation. Andreas also found a newspaper that neither he nor anyone else in the family had bought during the course of the following few days. No one in the family or the neighbors subscribed to that particular newspaper at the time because they were available only by subscription or for purchase in the town. Later, neighbors would assert that family members talked about missing house keys and frequently spotting a stranger with a mustache walking about the farm's perimeter. A new maid, 44-year-old Maria Baumgartner, arrived at the Gruber farmstead on Friday, March 31st, 1922, for her first day of work. Her first day would, regrettably, also be her last. By April 4th, no one had seen the Gruber family, but a few people had observed signs of farm life, albeit they were unaware that these were not coming from any of the family members. Mitchell Plockel, an artist, saw smoke pouring from the chimney on April 1st and claimed to have seen someone outside with a lantern, though he was unable to identify them. The next evening, farmer and butcher Simon Rieblender approached two strangers who were standing at the edge of the woodland before they turned away. When the postman brought mail on April 3rd and saw that the mail from Friday had not been touched, suspicions began to grow. Repairman Albert Hoffner arrived at the property the next day to service an engine in the machine room. Although he did not see any members of the family, he did hear the family dog inside and observed that the barn doors were latched. Albert didn't give the scene any thought at the time and entered the farm's open machine room to fix the engine. He finished his work after 4 hours, but as he was leaving the farm, he observed the dog was now leashed outside and the barn door was open, despite the fact that he had never seen or heard the family while he was working. When he returned to the town, Albert told Lawrence Schlittenbauer, the town's resident guide, about his unsettling incident. Worried that he still hadn't seen his family, he made the decision to go to the farm at about 3:30 p.m. with two of his buddies. When the three men arrived at the residence, they discovered that every door was closed and that no one was visible inside. They entered the barn after spotting the entrance open and found the dead of Andreas, his wife Kazilia, daughter Victoria, and granddaughter Kazilia piled high and covered in hay. Lawrence moved every corpse in an effort to find any remaining life. Lawrence raced into the house through a connected passage in the barn and continued his search after realizing that young Joseph was not among the mass of bodies that had been bludgeoned. He entered and discovered Maria and Joseph's lifeless, bloody bodies in his bassinet. Inspector Georg Reingruber from the Munich Police Department arrived to conduct an investigation hours later, but he first had to travel 45 kilometers. News in the small town traveled much more quickly than the police could ever get there, particularly news of murder. Numerous accounts described members of the community stomping around the crime site, moving evidence, and even preparing and eating meals there. A family had been slain with a pickaxe or mattock, according to an autopsy done on the remains the following day. Embarrassingly, everyone had passed away instantly from pickaxe hits to the head except for the younger Kezilla. Kezilla was still alive for several hours after the attack, but she ended up tearing out her own hair because of the trauma and shock of being attacked and witnessing the deaths of her family. The cops put out a timeline using the details found at the scene and after speaking with many neighbors. In an interview, Maria Baumgartner's sister verified that her sister had visited Maria on March 31st, which was the day of Maria's first day. When the authorities spoke with the mailman, he confirmed that the mail hadn't been disturbed since Friday morning, indicating that the Grubers were killed on March 31st. One by one, the family was brought inside the barn that night by the murderer or murderers, possibly by shouting out to them individually or creating a commotion within the barn. Each person was struck in the head by the pickaxe as they entered the barn. Both Victoria and her mother Kezilla had symptoms of having been strangled. It's conceivable that in order to do the job, they were strangled and then struck. Each of the four had taken several strikes to the head, with Victoria herself taking the brunt of the mattock upwards of 9 times. The murderer then entered the house and murdered Maria in her chamber. Joseph, the youngest victim, was the final one to be struck, killing him instantaneously. A more horrifying aspect of the killer was disclosed through additional conversations with neighbors and their own inquiry. Days after the killings, observers spotted smoke coming from the chimney, and several claimed to have seen one of the Grubers outside the house. The police also observed that food had been cooked, the cows had been milked, and the dog and cattle had been fed. The murderer had spent several days on the farm and was familiar with how to take care of it. The police finally understood the killers had been in the residence the day of the discovery and no one had seen them depart after speaking with Albert. When the police arrived, were they still there? Was one of the murderers a neighbor? The police's initial hypothesis was that it was a robbery. In a conversation with Crescens Rieger, the Gruber's former maid, she disclosed that Joseph Thaler had been to the farm nearly a year before the killings. Joseph Thaler and his brother were well-known local burglars who had carried out numerous small-scale break-ins. Joseph knocked on Crescens's window one night at random, and after first ignoring him, she eventually gave up and inquired about his needs. Joseph asked Crescens whether she knew where the family slept, giving the impression that he wanted to loot the farm. Rather than responding to his inquiries, Crescens pretended to be clueless. Joseph claimed he was alone, but she saw someone moving around in the bushes behind him as he was talking to her. Despite this, Crescens saw him go away with a person she thought was his brother. She also saw the two men stand by the barn and cast glances above. Crescens claimed that 2 years before, the brothers had concealed in the barn, and Andreas had pushed them out by firing a rifle in their direction. This added fuel to the police's suspicions. The police discovered cash, gold, and jewelry left at Gruber's house after the murders, despite the Thaler brothers first appearing to be the prime suspects. Those who murdered them didn't do it for the cash. Inspector Reingruber suspected Adolf Gump of being responsible for the deaths a few days after they occurred. Although there were rumors that Adolf and Victoria were dating, it's unclear if there was any further proof connecting him to the family or placing him at the crime site. Adolf had already been suspected, along with 3 other people, of taking part in the 1921 massacre of 9 peasants, but if this was the only evidence Reingruber possessed, it was at best tenuous. Sadly, Adolf could not be found and was never interrogated. Adolf's sister, Crescentia Mayer, gave a confession on her deathbed 30 years later in 1951. She asserted that the Grubers were murdered by her brothers Adolf and Anton. When prosecutor Andreas Popp learned about this, he arrested Anton Gump but was unable to interview Adolf because the latter had passed away in 1944 due to the Second World War. Anton was released and the case against him was abandoned by 1954 because there was little additional evidence to support the brothers' involvement, and because of Anton's claims of innocence. Carl Gabriel, the late husband of the widowed Victoria, was the next person that the police investigated. During the First World War, Carl Gabriel is believed to have died in France in December 1914. However, one of the stranger hypotheses about the murders was developed after word got out that his body had never been recovered. People started to speculate that Carl Gabriel had not actually died in battle and had instead learned of Victoria's son on his way back to the farm after numerous fruitless searches for the murderer. Many people thought Carl took out his fury on the entire family, either because he was upset about the prospect of an incestuous relationship between Victoria and Andreas, or simply because she had a son with someone else. In what appears to be a Hail Mary attempt, authorities even looked into this hypothesis. It didn't help that numerous people in the years that followed claimed to have seen a man in the neighborhood during and after the murders who matched Carl Gabriel's description. Carl Gabriel was seen by numerous soldiers lying lifeless after a shell attack in France. Therefore, authorities were able to determine he died in the First World War after speaking with several other soldiers. Carl Gabriel, however, continues to be mentioned in many articles as a reliable suspect for some reason. Although several more suspects have surfaced over the years, none of them seem to have compelling evidence connecting them to the killings. The person who found the bodies was Lawrence Schlittenbohr, the town's tour guide, but he also had hidden ties to the family, which makes him the most likely candidate. Many others were instantly skeptical of his initial behaviors, including relocating the remains at the crime scene and entering the house alone. Many people were aware that they shouldn't touch or move bodies even though forensics were not as advanced as they are now. Witnesses said that he did not appear to be reacting normally when the dead were discovered. When he saw the bloodied bodies, he remained composed and showed no signs of disgust. Additionally, it was claimed that Lawrence owned a key to the house, echoing Andreas's earlier claims of missing keys. When questioned by the authorities, Lawrence explained away his strange behaviors by verifying a rumor about his connection to the Gruber family that had been going about. After discovering the family, Lawrence allegedly pretended to be the father of little Joseph and moved the remains out of the way in order to look for his kid. However, the police noted that Lawrence had previously denied being Joseph's father. Lawrence asserted that he only did this after Victoria and Andreas' alleged incest caused him to doubt the paternity. When the police learned that Victoria had attempted to have Lawrence's alimony payments ordered by the courts, their efforts to prove Lawrence's innocence failed. According to theories, Lawrence killed the victims in order to avoid making the payments because he was already having financial difficulties and had another family because Victoria was successful. A number of witnesses came forward claiming to have overheard Victoria and Lawrence arguing the day before the killings over Joseph's payments and paternity. Others have argued that Lawrence only admitted to being Joseph's father after the killings in order to stake a claim to a potential inheritance. Despite all the claims and speculations, they are only that, theories, and the police were unable to crack the case at the time due to the lack of solid evidence. For Lawrence, he claimed that he was focused on attempting to find his son, which is why he moved the bodies and showed no reaction to them. His post-event reactions, which seemed emotionless, may have been readily explained by shock. The police had no justification to detain him because they lacked solid proof. Despite this, many people asserted that Lawrence was responsible for the killings. Nevertheless, Lawrence vigorously contested every accusation in court and prevailed in numerous slander cases up to his death in 1941. Despite the fact that the police had suspicions about 100 different people, no one was ever detained or put on trial for the crimes. Although the case was resolved in 1955, many people's memories of it persisted for many years. Modern forensics were used in 2007 by a group of police academy students in Germany to look into the case. They identified a top suspect while saying it would be difficult to solve the crime after so much time. Out of respect for the suspect's ancestors, they chose not to identify the culprit. Since the case is already 100 years old, it is nearly a given that these horrifying killings will never be solved. Even yet, many have and will continue to spend years and decades looking for the murderer in an effort to put the Hinterkaifeck farming family's killer to justice. There is no doubt that a person or persons motivated by wickedness and hatred tragically and unceremoniously took the lives of 6 people. If you enjoyed tonight's virtual nightmare, I hope the like and subscribe button haunt you tonight. Also, turn on all notifications to avoid being haunting. If you want to share your own virtual nightmare story, submit via Reddit or Instagram. Links will be in the description.